to go. All right, we'll get started back. We'd like to welcome Mr. David Milliron. We appreciate your consideration and interest in our city manager position. If you would, come up to the dais and we'll have you sit here. We have you also some water if you need. So, a brief explanation. What we'll do is we'll do a round robin. We'll let you do an introduction. We'll do a round robin between the council, ask some questions. Probably about 3 questions per. Once we get done, then we'll have Mr. Cook from East Region News Online. He has fielded questions from the citizens, and he will then present some of those to be answered that the citizens have submitted, and we'll let you do closing comments or statements. So again, welcome. We appreciate you coming, and we'll let you open up and tell us a little bit about yourself.
You're going to assume this is on, so.
They may have to. We're about to get these replaced, so it may need to get a little closer.
All right, there you go. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So the last name, which is correctly pronounced, is Milliron.
Yeah, you may feel a little bit closer. They're saying it's easier out there.
All right. Hopefully that's better. Quickly,
Still not good?
No.
The lights on. Did we unplug? Yeah.
Oh,
I think it's well, even if that light's on, it doesn't mean that the light down here is on.
The light.
Sounds like somebody's underneath it.
Codes. They can fix it.
It's not picking you up, so if you can just talk louder or move it a little closer. We all struggle with this, so.
well, this will be a first. Normally, no one ever says that they can't hear me. So I usually have to keep the voice down, but with this right here. So very quickly, I have 12 years of public administration experience. I have 30 years in the public and private industry. Currently, I'm the city manager in Hogansville, Georgia. That's about 40 minutes southwest of downtown Atlanta. When I'm not working, folks usually will find me out on the lake. We enjoy boating and fishing, and no kids, but I'll tell you real quickly, we have 2 Clumber Spaniels, and those are our kids. They are treated as family, and they are precious and near and dear. So I don't want to bore you. I want to reserve as much time to questions and give you an opportunity to get to know me and vice versa.
Thank you. We'll start with Vice Mayor Helmer.
Thank you for coming. How would you characterize your style of management?
My style of management, first and foremost, I like to empower employees. I'm not a micromanager by any means, but at the same time, you have to have accountability. So generally, once the council has gone through and set its mission and vision, which usually rolls over to strategic planning, that gives me an opportunity to work with the department heads to set the goals, and that's a trickle-down effect so that folks know what's expected of them, what they're going to be judged about. If you were to reach out to my colleagues, those I've worked with, those who have worked for me, or those I've worked for, it is top-down, no surprises. I should not have anyone ever come into my office and not know that there's an issue. I believe in progressive discipline. If there's an issue, address it then and move on. So when we do get to an evaluation, there are no surprises. Employees are your best assets. When you lose one, that's a lot of money walking out the door. So my management style is not micromanagement, empowerment, making sure that I support when you do something great, making sure that you get before the council and everybody knows it. And with a representative of the media here, if he takes the opportunity to look at our online presence, you'll see that we often will reward and give kudos to our staff, because they're the folks that are out there day in and day out.
Councilman Cagle?
All right, sir. How do you feel on the open records law?
Well, if you look in the resume, you'll find I was a recovering journalist for 20 years. And if you dig a little further, and you'll find that I actually helped author the current Open Records Act that's in the state of Georgia, working with the Georgia First Amendment Foundation. And then I also do open records and open meetings training throughout Georgia. So the best way is that this is the public's government. If hired, I just had the opportunity to manage it and implement the council's policy.
Mr. Johnson?
Welcome, Mr. Milliron. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in being part of the East Church City. One thing I'm really passionate about is the safety of our first responders, and I just want to know kind of how you prioritize making sure that our police and our fire departments are equipped with the necessary tools and the resources continuously to make sure that they're able to protect themselves in the line of duty. I'm sure I just want to know kind of how you prioritize it, just to make sure that they have the updated equipment, just making sure that they're getting what they're asked for, or getting what they're asking for, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, great question. First and foremost, if hired, you'll find that I actually do a quarterly ride-along. I always have the opportunity to go and meet with departments, but generally, you don't get to meet with all of your emergency personnel and first responders because they work varied shifts, so you have to go to them. The reason I do that is I call the chief, let him know what day I plan to go out, and he assigns someone to me. Is that I can go, I can see, I can listen, I can talk, I can have great dialogue one-on-one. And you find out that those mental notes are made. So one of our officers recently came and thanked me, I looked at him and said, "What are you thanking me for?" And he's like, "I know you were behind getting that paint on that car fixed because I mentioned it to you during the ride along." And it did. His car did not present the city well. As far as the prioritization of the budget, if you were to reach out to the chief at the city of Hogansville, for instance, he'll tell you that for the first time, wow, I have a city manager that comes to me and says, "What's your budget priorities?" and work through that well before it ever gets to the point of presenting. His experience has always been the budget was put together, presented to the council, they would adopt it, and he would be told, "This is your budget." And that's backwards. That's not how you set the priorities. The other reason that you do the ride-alongs is that, for instance, our radio system, there's no in-car radios. We're trying to work on that. I think that within the next couple of months we'll fix it. But we'd gone out on the interstate, and I thought the officer was joking when he asked me whether or not I knew how to operate a shotgun. And so as he got out of the car on the traffic stop, he just said, "Whatever you do, don't allow me to, get shot out here and get killed." And I did. I thought he was joking until he got alongside the car and he was trying to call in 3 times just to get the tag run. They didn't even know that we had stopped. At which point I realized, whoa, where's that shotgun? So no longer do we allow them to go up on the interstate, nor will we until that radio system's fixed. If you don't have that communication backup, you're just a duck out there. It's just too. So there's some examples of how we set the priorities. We also then take those priorities and we recognize that not everything can be funded through the general fund, so we aggressively go after grants. I'm proud to say that our department just got all brand new body cams. They had very archaic technology. We would review a couple cases and the video would come on and off. Well, what happened? The councilman asked about transparency. You show that video to the public and they think the officer was turning it on, turning it off deliberately. That's not what was happening. It was just failing. So we went and got a federal grant, and the entire department now has brand new equipment, and then we have two in reserve. That's just some examples.
Thank you, thank you.
My question is about citizens. To what extent do you believe contact with the citizens and citizens groups is important, and how do you typically handle this responsibility?
The interaction with the citizens is paramount. Generally, in here, folks are here usually right before the council meeting. We're out, we're talking to folks, we're interacting. But you're also going out and meeting with the community. Each quarter, I have a different department head where we go out. Generally, the mayor's with us, and I actually have interactive coffees where we sit down and we just listen. Also, we'll go to various groups, church groups. We'll go into the civic organizations, and we'll have listening sessions. A lot of that is because the folks aren't always going to come to the local government. I mean, it's great, you're filming this, you have a YouTube channel on, and a lot of folks will say, because the city's so transparent, you know, you put things out. Well, you can raise that transparency. We don't have the luxury in our current city, but have had it in the last two. We'll be live streaming in real time, but every single document that's handed, the public has. So if they come in with their smart or they're just at home, they have the same documents that you have when you're making the decisions. The other thing is that a city manager has to keep their thumb on the pulse of the local community. And the only way you do that is by getting to know folks, understanding what their issues are. Some things may be very, very important to one individual, but not the whole. But it's not that you dismiss it. You let them know, yes, we can do something about it. Yes, we could if, or this isn't currently a priority, but I do have it on a list. At some point, if we can get it addressed, we will. But I always encourage them. You always have the opportunity to go present to the council. I publish a city manager's report. You all could go on our site at every city I have, it's there. So when I have concerns from the public, the council knows about it quicker than it shows up in that report, so that you know what I'm hearing. I always ask for the same thing back. You're the eyes and ears out. If hired, I'm only one person. I can't see everything. So I ask that, you know, if you hear something, I just had a commissioner, I was in training in South Carolina, and a county commissioner sent me a picture of a pothole. Said, hey, boom, here. Told me where it was. The day later, I responded back, interacted with staff. You know, commissioner, it's done, it's taken care of. That's the kind of relationship that you want to have. The public has to feel comfortable to approach a city manager or any staff and know that they were heard, they know where you are on the issue, and if it's going to get done, when's it going to get done, and that you follow up, that they know that it's been addressed. And that's important.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for being here.
So my question is going to be concerning your experience with planning, zoning, business development. As you see, we've got a lot of development going at the lower end by the interstate, but we have a lack of that middle to the other end. So can you provide us some of your experience, knowledge, and background with economic development?
Well, first and foremost, I've come through East Ridge. I've been in Georgia 22 years now. So East Ridge, you cannot, it's almost, you could tell a joke and say, you know, you got to go through East Ridge to get to heaven. So I am familiar with this area. In fact, the tunnels are reminiscent of the time I spent in Washington, D.C., is that they're almost the same material. And so this afternoon, when I did get here, what I did is I drove almost, you know, sector by sector, block by block, both sides of the interstate. And I was going out, I was looking for development. And the key things that I'm looking at is, and this comes from that planning and zoning, or more importantly, the code enforcement side, is where are folks taking care of their properties? Where are they parking, you know, in their front yards? How do the aesthetics look? when you drive through the community, how much civic pride is in certain areas. Because as you can imagine, there's a vast difference depending on where you are in the community. Specific to the experience, so I'm in a city where right now it's only 3,000 population. I've managed, significantly larger, but in a smaller city, the resources are finite. But my time there working with staff, we have a very talented individual that loves to write grants, another individual that likes to write plans, and then we use consultants. So in each of the cities that I've been in, we've done a downtown master plan, which is important, but you have to step back. Remember, it's planning. So what's the mission? What's the vision of this governing body? What is then your strategic plan? For the strategic plan, those are the things you want to get done, and those should be linked directly to your comprehensive plan, your downtown master plan, your industrial plan, your economic development plan, your corridor plans. You have multiple corridors coming in here, and that has to do with everything from the signage and future planning as to how you want that to look in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, because you're putting in the foundation now for what not necessarily the city is now, but what you want it to be for your children and your grandchildren and future. So, did I answer the question, or do you want any other specifics, sir?
That's good, thank you.
Can you tell us more about your experience working with the police department, and what do you think is the most challenging aspect of that?
Most challenging aspect is keeping and retaining talent. Every time an officer goes out the door, it's like a $50,000 cash register. You have recruited that person, you have outfitted that person, you have sent them to training, and when they go out, their knowledge and history of everything, every individual that they've interacted with, every relationship, it's gone. It's almost like a competition right now in Metro Atlanta, the things that different agencies are offering just to recruit. And I'll be the first to say, as a city manager, I would not do their job. I have the utmost respect, but I'm the city recorder, God bless her, when I went out to shake her, she had a tape recorder in her hand. And I backed away, and you should have saw her face, and because it looked to me like a taser real quick. And these officers, when they go through training, I mean, in order to use the taser, they have to be tased. I mean, in order to use pepper spray, they have to be pepper sprayed. I mean, would any of you want to go through that just to do the job so that you could defend yourself? And then it's so litigious, everything. It's like, the laws and the courts have said you can only one up. So, do I pull out my ASPI baton, for those that don't know? Do I pull out my pepper spray? Do I pull out the taser? When do I use my weapon? And a split-second hair decision decides whether or not they're being persecuted in public. So when you look at individuals in public safety and supporting them, we try to make sure that they have what's necessary to do their job. We try to find ways. I was just at training, and I'll tell you, I bring lots of ideas back. One of the ideas that I'm bringing back to chat with the chief, I was already on the phone with him as I was coming back saying, so I got to go to this BMW plant and learn about economic development, the impact, and how many are being shipped abroad, and all the jobs. But they also allowed us to get in like 4 or 5 different BMWs and be a kid in a candy shop and drive on these tracks. And I said, we really need to implement an Officer of the Year program. And so as it moves Officer of the Month of the Year, at that 1 year mark, send he and his wife up to Greer, South Carolina, let them get in, yes, they have cars out there that they could drive 120, 140 miles, not legally all the time. Up there, you can get them trained and they can have fun and you can reward them, but you're also bringing something back. They have learned from professional drivers how to really drive that police car. And yes, I almost lost my Cheerios on one of the runs, and I had a professional driver. So all that training, all that expertise is important. The recruitment of those employees bar none. You gotta listen to them, you gotta keep them happy, and that's a tough thing to do.
All right, sir. Describe your experience, if any, in dealing with charges of discrimination or grievances filed against you or your city.
You know, if you reach out to each of the HR managers, I've never had a charge or grievance on my watch in any of the 3 cities I've ever worked at. A lot of that has to do with training the HR, making sure that you do all of the training. It's surprising, you know, when you come into an organization that the supervisors have to understand what they can and cannot do. Accidents happen, but training will thwart that. We have had folks that have left that have made Department of Labor filings for like unemployment, but on my watch, if we've had to dismiss, it's been fair. So I think I'm pretty accurate in saying all 3, we've never had one, which is a fortunate. I have inherited a few, so when I've got to the city, so I've been involved in that. Each of my superintendents, for instance, in Public Works, they've never had management training before. They have consistently been going through management training. They now actually sit in. They've never been allowed before to sit in on the hiring process. So they are coached and trained. Questions you can ask, questions you cannot ask. And so they're provided and coached that before they go into that process. And then before, obviously on my watch, I have the ultimate say as to whether or not someone's hired or whether or not they stay. So I always tell folks on my right hand is the HR manager and on the left is the city attorney. And I keep them very close to me for a reason. And that's, lawsuits and become very expensive to the taxpayers.
In the various cities that you've worked in, can you tell me how successful you've been in obtaining different grants, whether they be state or federal grants? And could you maybe list specifically what projects you have done after obtaining those grants?
This is not a quick answer, but it's almost as if I handed you $20 and said, "Would you ask that question?" So the current city, Hogansville, has been the absolute greatest challenge. I have a general fund or M&O budget that is $1.1 million in the red. So when I got there, the utilities were not being maintained, the infrastructure wasn't being maintained. They simply were just pulling off every single thing they can. So I've worked with the governing body to try to start to turn the ship, because in a city where all of your money is in one bucket, which is the utilities, if we had a hurricane or tornado go through, we're bankrupt. So part of that has been having to consistently and aggressively go after every grant you can. Our city only has about $500,000 coming in property tax revenue, and then we write a $250,000 of that right back to the county fire department based on an old agreement that will get revised, we believe, later this year. So I only have $250,000 of tax money to work with. So everything else that's coming in our $12 million budget has to be done through grants. We have $14 million in debt, and that's on us. That's not secured by something. That's on the taxpayers. So you start with I mentioned the grant for the police department for the body cameras, because we couldn't afford otherwise to buy them. We have submitted successfully grant applications to the USDA, because it's rural community, so that they actually pay for 50% up to $25,000 for those police cars. We have the federal Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, for low to moderate in order to do the infrastructure for water pressure, water replacement. We are operating right now on a $2.5 million USDA grant, and we are upgrading and replacing our entire wastewater treatment plant, which is a $8.6 million endeavor. We are using our tax money to do our asphalt paving and repaving, but we have to pull 3 years worth in order to do anything. We just purchased a new city hall and had the city hall completely re-roofed and at zero cost to the taxpayers. And we are going to work with the State Department of Corrections to renovate the interior so that we can move into that building. And again, we anticipate at no cost to taxpayers. So that's why I hope you don't think the answer is coy, but I almost thought it was like I planted the question. And I go to each city, but why bore you? Pretty much we have worked with grants at every level at each city. Your actual budget should have a capital plan, a CIP plan, and in there you should see your intergovernmental funds coming in and be able, and the governing body will not be surprised because you ought not, or at least that's my philosophy, you ought not be applying for grants unless you get the blessing of the governing body, because it may need matching funds. So you'll never be surprised that, hey, we just got approved for the grant, we only need a 30% match. And it's like, cool. So.
Thank you.
My question is, based on your education, experience, and background, what do you consider to be your strengths in dealing with the local government problems, and what do you consider your weaknesses?
My strengths, huge communicator, very compassionate, and very ethical. On the downside, I tend to, I'm about details, and so because I'm about details, I have to incorporate in my management with my direct reports. A good example is I wanted a daily inspection report on vehicles. We need to know the status of the vehicles, are they safe to drive, how many miles. I need to make sure that we're getting management reports so we can make management decisions. So I tasked a superintendent with, go out, you develop the form, talk to everybody that you need to, get examples from other cities, just bring me what your plan is and I'll review it. That way I never become a micromanager. I don't tell them what I want in the inspection report, and sometimes they blow the socks off of you and they go overboard. They do. So I always factor that into the management style. The second is that I tend to, if you ask my wife, it's like, why do you work so much? I love my job. I love managing cities, interacting with folks every single day. It's like a newspaper. The product every day, you recreate the entire product. I tell folks that if I put together, I come in and I sit here and I write out, an agenda and say, this is what I want to get accomplished today. The reality is anything can happen, anything can hijack that. So what I do is I work with my staff on creating time on Fridays. Please, be respectful of my schedule after lunch on Fridays. That is my strategic planning and strategic thinking time. And so as management, so that I'm not doing 20 other things, I budget and plan for that time, and so I compensate for that. And then the third issue is that, I call it a negative, but I think sometimes it's a positive, is I can be too trusting sometimes. I want to really believe people when they come and tell me that, they weren't really stealing the power, that they didn't do that, it was someone else that connected that to the wires. And so you want to believe them. And sometimes too often, you go and do the investigation and you feel like, oh God, what just happened here? So I always try to take folks at their word until proven otherwise. And so that's either a plus or a negative.
So it just so happens that at this point in time of the year, we're into heavy budget prep, getting ready for our next year's budget. So can you give me your experience, your style, and how you're prepped for preparing a budget?
So hopefully, by this time, and I recognize you've been without a full-time manager, you've got an interim, but so my experience has been that I'll start it from the front. I generally will always bring to the governing body a calendar and say, this is the draft proposed budget calendar. You've looked at all of your regulatory state laws, local laws, charter, anything that says that certain dates have to occur. North Carolina, for instance, has to have budget ordinances and things by certain dates. So you come with a budget calendar. That calendar has already been assigned where we know at the department level that they've got to start thinking of their budget. I'm in Hogansville. We have a July 1 budget cycle. We started our budget cycle with staff, getting them thinking about that in February. Once the governing body approves that calendar, then that's what starts to kick off everything. And keep in mind, I always mention back to that strategic plan and your capital improvement plan. So you're part of that schedule as you're coming to the governing body, and hopefully you're entertaining work sessions, saying, okay, what are your priorities? What are things that you all want to see in the budget? You're the eyes and ears. You're the representatives of the public. So you have those priorities. You're hearing the things. And that allows us as staff and administration to start working and figuring out how can we potentially achieve that in the budget? What's the options? Once we get past that, we'll be distributing to all the department levels what I call our 5-year histories. We know what our anticipated revenues will be based on year to date and a 5-year history. We'll know what the budget and expenditures and expenses have been over the last 5 years, so that at a department level, if you're looking to go 1 penny above, I know that may sound minute, but if you're looking to go 1 penny above, you got to justify in the meeting where I'm sitting there, the finance person's sitting there. Some cities have finance committees, so sometimes I have elected officials there, and you're having to justify, and then ultimately I'm going to sit there, if it's not a finance committee, if it's the manager, we're going to go through and say, okay, what are your priorities? What do you absolutely have to have? What can you do away? Give me, and there's a numbering system where you prioritize. By that time, it comes to you as a draft budget. And I always give the governing body 30 days to review. Most of you, and if not all of you, probably have full-time jobs, families, etc. You have to have time to digest. There's the budget memo in there. It's all explained. We'll put it online so that the public can see it. And then generally that kicks off your official hearings, meetings, workshops, town halls, whatever you want to do to vet the budget. And then it's always our goal to have that budget hopefully adopted no less than 20 days before the absolute minimum. This most recent budget, we actually had exceeded that but I was worried that it was going to go a little further. But that's pretty much the budget process, if you will. There's a lot of components to it, and a lot of players to make that happen.
Thank you.
What are the elements that you employ that contribute to a successful relationship with the news media?
Number one, honesty. Number two, access. My firm belief is that it's the public's government, and the news media has no additional access than anyone else walking off the street. Granted, the media has a role which is disseminating the information, but if you look at each of these cities that I've served, in fact, I could show you a letter from one of the reporters in Villa Rica. She came and sat down with me. She was freelance. I guess they pay her based on the article. And she said that we were putting her out of a job because the staff was trained to be able to put information out. If something happened, we have an obligation to let the public know. And we're also distributing all of that to the news media as well. You know, my belief is that you can put the packets online and the public can have that access, but the media is coming in and digesting it and getting the input and making it so that the general public in layman's terms can understand the process of what's happening. So that relationship's important. I have a copy. I'll gladly leave it with the city recorder and share it around. But for instance, I have a proposed plan for seamless transition if hired. And one of the things on there is you get out and you will introduce me to key folks. But the news media is integral in that. You have to have a relationship. They have to know that if they call and I don't answer, that they get a text back that I'm busy, but that they know they get that call back. That's very, very important. And that because it's very, very easy to lose trust in what you do. You know, they'll have you under a microscope. It's a very uneasy situation, and it's not one that I want to be on or in. But I certainly see my colleagues under that scrutiny.
All right, this is kind of a lengthy question here. When a special call meeting is called and an agenda is presented to the public, part of the agenda is discussed in an open meeting. Then the rest of the agenda is done in an executive session. If a citizen requests a copy of the minutes of the agenda in question, do you think the minutes of the whole agenda should be made available?
It's not necessarily my opinion or what I think or don't think. It's really what the law says and what the governing body is. That executive session is your executive session, and the law affords the governing body an opportunity to go into executive session for reasons. I'll be the first to say that I've not read your section under your state law for executive session, so I'll give you a parallel. In Georgia, you have executive session, and there's specific criteria for which you can go into executive session. So when the governing body says that they're going to have an executive session, we list specifically on the agenda what exemption allows you to go in. And then I have a great relationship with the mayor, and so we've gotten to the point where the mayor will say, you know, we're going into executive session. We do not anticipate any public action by the governing body afterwards. For instance, if it's a legal issue where you're discussing it, but you don't have to come out yet and take a vote. It's you're telling the city attorney, you know, go file suit, or this is how we want to respond. As far as the minutes in Georgia's parallel, they can only be viewed under the microscope of a judge in closed session. However, if there is a challenge to the executive session and they found the governing body violated it, they become public. Those executive session minutes also become public after the action is done. For instance, in executive session, authorize the city manager to go negotiate for real estate. You don't want everybody knowing your negotiating price. You authorize me to do it. Before you close on the property, you come out and you vote on it. Those minutes in that state come public. However, in Georgia, there's no law that prohibits any elected official from coming out of executive session and holding a press conference, as one elected official did in another city. So each state has, but it's not the opinion of the city manager to guide you as to what I think should or should not happen. Sure, I have an opinion, but it's the governing body's executive session. It's not the city manager's executive session. And you're also the ones that are on the hook with respect to the law. I hope that answered, but I'm just being frank and honest with you.
When it comes to hiring or employing police chiefs or fire chiefs, or any department head, do you currently, or do you believe in promoting within the departments or going outside the department?
You always try to promote from within first. I'm actually on a recruitment team right now in Troup County, Georgia, where each city manager and the county manager have been looking to recruit a Parks and Rec director. And that's because we have service delivery agreements in place, and it's a countywide program versus like my last city where we ran recreation. So in that respect, I just sent a text 2 days ago saying, okay, we've been unsuccessful with this search. And I know that we interviewed a couple internal. So my suggestion was, how about you give one of those an opportunity to be interim for 3 months or 6 months? I know they didn't woo us over in the interview, but give them a chance to do the job and see if they can prove and change our mind differently. You can only raise an employee's ability if you give them opportunities. Okay, so like in my city, we'll cross-train. And what that means is, you'll come and work in that department for a week, and they'll send someone over, and you cross-train. The reason is because some employees don't want to be management. You got to find out who wants to be a supervisor, who wants to be management. Some positions can be lateral. I have, for instance, laborers and maintenance workers in public works, but I also have the same position in the water department, also wastewater. And they can do lateral. Each position in the job description knows what the next level position up. And on the pay scale, they see, for instance, like, what a maintenance worker 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is. You try to recruit and move internal. And I would be failing my job if I'm not always working to invest in succession. Because at the end of the day, if you sort of shorten that word, it's all about success. And succession isn't just so that you have a replacement, it's so that someone can be successful in a position and hopefully move up in the organization. And you find out a lot of that during the annual review process when you're setting goals. For instance, I have a public works director, superintendent right now, who has never had management training. So he is going through a 2-year program now, and 3 times a year for an entire week gets immersed in a leadership training program, and ultimately will be a certified public works superintendent at the end of the 2 years. He's earned that, he deserves it, and it goes back to the litigation question and folks filing. If he doesn't have the right training and something happens with an employee, whether it's a safety issue or a labor issue or a discrimination issue, ultimately it falls back on the manager.
Thank you.
Well, my question, some of it you may have already touched on. It's what involvement have you had in developing personnel rules, regulations, and procedures, and what experience have you had in training or motivating employees?
So In each of the three cities, I've worked very strategic with the human resources manager or director, depending on which size city. In each of those, it's always fascinating when you come into a local government, because you know, if you have corporate experience, when you come into the government side, it's like, y'all don't have a personnel handbook, you don't have a pay scale, you don't have job descriptions. What do you mean it's been 12 years since you've been evaluated? Employees need to know where they stand, they need to know what their authority is and latitude, and if you don't tell them. So we've created the personnel manuals. They have to get updated on an annual basis, because anyone that understands HR knows that laws change because of litigation and otherwise. As far as I mentioned the cross-training, I mentioned how we make sure that we're able to send folks to training. We have to be very creative on that. Sometimes because of the size city I'm at now, we get grants and stipends. I'm not embarrassed to say we also use frequent flyer miles or hotel miles just to make sure that they have their stay. We're running a tight ship. And each employee knows what training is afforded them, and they're held accountable. For instance, right now, we're going through a safety officer certification. We have competitively changed over to a new liability insurance, and part of that is now monthly safety meetings. So not only is he learning to become the safety officer, he's now running monthly trainings with help and support. He's not at it alone, and then everybody's learning together. And then I'll hop in the truck with him, and we'll go out to sites, and I have him, you know, he has his little checklist. It's like, okay, they got their helmets on, yes, they got their thing. And because I'm just sitting there observing, you know, if he's picking up, is that investment paying off? And so far, I will say that I'm very, very proud. The one thing they hate, and don't ask me why, who wants to go in a bucket truck without the harness, you know? But they would do it, and they're like, oh, no, yeah. And I'm like, you know, and so he will come in, and he's like, here's this. I'm like, what's this? He's like, I just wrote up someone for being in the bucket truck without their harness. I'm like, good job, you know. And that's why I say, good job, you're doing your job. Colleagues might not like them, but they understand training, because the liability insurance company comes in and shows videos. You know, you've seen horror movies. Gosh, the stuff they show you is will scare you. It's not worth it.
Can you give me your view on the role of a city manager and how that you deal and interact with administration and department heads?
All right, so when you say administration, to me as a city manager, administration is my direct report. So that's the day-to-day administration. Those are the folks that generally I'm working with. I want to make sure that I understand the difference that you're asking.
As in with council
Okay.
and
government.
with department heads, yes, I apologize for.
Okay. So this is a unique side. So I got an opportunity to serve as an elected official in a community in Metro Atlanta. I say that because I understand both roles. I understand the role of the manager, and I understand the role of the elected official. For instance, the individual elected officials should be able to go to any department head and ask them any question they want, as long as they're not given a directive. Any council manager form of government, you know, if you want to go out and say, hey, you know, I've noticed that you all have been paving along East Street, you know, what was the thought process there? If you want to go out and ask them, I have no problem. Know that that department head will send me a text or an email and say, hey, just wanted to let you know the mayor dropped by. He was just curious about the paving. That way, no one's ever surprised. We're all on the same team together. If it's a directive, they'll call me immediately and say, you know, Councilman was over and he told me to get that pothole done. Okay, I'm on it. Is the pothole an issue? Yeah, go ahead and fix the pothole. Let me call the council member. Let me have that conversation. Because my role is to implement your policy and run the day-to-day operations of your city. And I have to implement the policy, but also we're constantly making management decisions all day long. What's priority, what's not priority. You know, I may have a huge water leak or some issue, and I can't take someone off to go fix a pothole. But I can assure you we're going to get fixed, and here's when it's going to get fixed. Just work through your manager, let us know. As far as the management team, I meet with my management team on a weekly basis. It's an all hands on deck. I'll be frank with you, usually the first 15 minutes is, you know, what'd you do this weekend? You know, tell me, you know, how's Miss Susie? How's that new grandchild? You know, we're just catching up, sort of, you know, what's going on in people's lives. From there, each department gets to go run down of, okay, what's going on in your department? What's the plan for this week? You know, are there issues? You know, for instance, we had a company in this past week replacing fire hydrants. What's the communication plan to the public? You know, and I'm listening. And the interesting thing about this is they had written up the social media and the plan verbiage for the website. And I said, that's great. I said, but not everybody's on social media. Not everyone's going to go to the website. So you don't have opportunity to get out the utility bills. So how about you put some door hangers, you know, 24 hours in advance. Let them know their water's going to be turned off so that they don't get surprised. Because the call you don't want is, why is my water? It's like, there's water's off. They don't know their water's off. How come they don't know their water's off? You want to try to avoid problems up front. And so that's what we're really discussing at that point. And then we meet once a quarter to review the goals and the strategic plan. Where are we? Where should we be? We look at our large projects, and then anything that is going to use a resource from another department, that is the time to bring it up at that meeting. You know, Parks and Rec, always using the maintenance folks from Public Works without them knowing. Superintendents, you got to work together, otherwise you're doing this. And then what are they doing? They're then hoarding the resources. We're all on the same team here, so we have to be team players.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to then hand it over to Mr. Cook with some questions. He may need a few minutes to prepare himself.
Am I allowed to just say no comment?
I always get a comment. The mayor asked me some weeks ago if I would be a conduit for the readers of East Ridge News Online to ask questions to the candidates who are interviewing for the city manager's job. And I've received several dozen legitimate questions. Many of them, to the credit of our readers, have been asked by the council members. So I'm trying desperately not to be redundant. Been open with one I've asked everyone else. I'm sure you're aware of the economic development that's going on down at Interstate 75 and Exit 1 in Jordan Crossing. And a lot of people are concerned that that kind of development is not making its way up the commercial corridor towards the western end of the city. And in particular, a lot of small local businesses are not benefiting very much from that development down there. As the new city manager, how would you plan to promote growth of small local businesses in our city?
Well, in researching the city, obviously, I was very intrigued by the councils that the chamber has set up and had read their strategic plan and their objectives of going out and starting to talk to the businesses. So first, you step back, and I mentioned the corridor plans. The reality is that the governing body has to really know and understand what they want developed, where they want it developed, and what is that vision. And that vision should really mirror that of the public, so that the city manager is not out, talking to XYZ development about a plan that could potentially change the face of a corridor without it being on the same sheet of music. The second is that I will applaud the mayor. I see that he's very transparent, goes out and talks to folks, is open door. I don't know if that's done. Also, everyone says the chamber, but not everyone joins the chamber. So we have what we call our Merchants Association, and so we go and we sit down with them. We ask the chamber, hey, look at it as potential recruiting for you. There's always that tussle about, yes, I know they're not a chamber member, but we as the city want to do ribbon cuttings. You go and you talk to them, you cross-promote them, you look at the avenues that can move businesses forward. For instance, they may say that, can you publish a directory on the website so that everyone knows what, if you want dry cleaning, here's the 5 places of dry cleaning. Downtown has all of the resources through downtown merchants associations, Main Street programs, but when you move out to the corridor, that infrastructure is not there. And there's no reason that can't happen. The other thing is that you sometimes have to take opportunities to those corridors. For instance, everybody always wants to do a festival downtown. So I always like to look at new ideas, and you have to always bring them before the council and say, I'd like to pilot. And pilot's always code word for, I'd like to try this. If it fails, hey, it's on me, we won't do it again. But if it's successful, let's run it out. And so sometimes you can get with the merchants and say, in that corridor, if the council and the police and everyone's on board, can we shut down a street or two? Can we do a festival? And at the same time, you are the vendors for that festival. And then you'll have entertainment out there. So again, it's about ideas. It's about, and you'll hear this a lot from me if you hire me. It's about throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Figuratively, of course.
That's a great quote. I'm going to have to get that down.
I think they can sell you a videotape pretty cheaply.
Yeah, but I'm going to post this tomorrow.
So is your page just online?
Yes.
Okay, cool. How many folks do you have following you?
Between 30 and 60,000 views a month.
Wow. Okay.
I like it. Since I've been publishing since 2012, I've gotten a total of 1.25 million views. So it's a big number. I'll throw it out there since you asked. Are you familiar with the Board of Regents Act? Have you read the legislation?
The Board of Regents Act, if I'm not mistaken, are you talking about the Tri-City taxation agreement?
Yes.
With the 360 that just got extended to, what, 2027? Yes, sir.
What are your views on it, and how would you help move the city forward in taking full advantage of the opportunities of the Board of Regents Act?
So, in part, great ideas are just that, and they're just ideas unless you work to implement them. Ideas don't get implemented unless they're a plan. When you look at great cities, I was just in Greenville, South Carolina. I look at, say, Decatur, Georgia. Those are cities that stuck to plans, and then they found mechanisms to fund them. You have just over 4% committed in order to do economic development and expand. So part of that is, once the governing body has worked to come up with those great ideas that it wants to pursue, and they're part of plans, my job is to get out there and make sure it happens, and recruit whatever mechanism I can, and more importantly, keep things on budget or under budget and on time.
Well, the Board of Region Act is more than an idea, and it's been effectively implemented. We're several years down the road there, and we're relying on the Board of Region to fund a lot of this money to fund much of our economic development. In terms of the Board of Region, in the past, the city manager has been the person negotiating with various businesses to provide incentives for them to locate here. Do you have much experience in negotiating incentive packages with the private sector?
I do, and when I looked at the city's finances, I noticed that a good chunk, just over 12 million, was reimbursable by those implemented plans, if you will. So incentive plans are important. The city manager should not and ought not be out negotiating things that are not within the parameters of the governing body. Meaning, I can throw spaghetti at the wall and negotiate incentives, but economic development incentives ought to have parameters, so that I don't come to your business and say, if you do X, well, we'll get Y. I can't make that kind of commitment on behalf of the city, and I can get myself in trouble real quick. I've done a number of public-private partnerships. I have been strategic in each of the named cities. Villa Rica, actually, I think was somewhere over the name of 87 million of new investment, mainly in the industrial park. Each of those have approved incentive packages attached to them, approved by both the county and the local municipalities' governing bodies. So if there is an executive session for economic development, and that's the exemption, generally we'll be talking about that in closed doors if we're permitted under law. And then ultimately that document comes to the table as a public document when it's ready to be voted upon.
I'm assuming that $87 million in development in Villa Rica, you went before something akin to an industrial development board?
We had an industrial development authority, we had the downtown development authority, we had the community redevelopment agency, so we had multiple, and then of course we also had the county's economic development that worked with the state's Department and Division of Economic Development. Because at some time, some of those incentives came directly from the state. The One Georgia program, for instance, for, want that Bass Pro Shop, but Department of Transportation, I really need a corridor improvement to that intersection, so that's where you come in with incentives from the state.
Have you had much experience with implementing redevelopment plans? Because you may have noticed that this end of Ringgold Road is much older. There's a circa 1950 mall, along with a bunch of decaying businesses. Do you have any ideas or any plans on how you might be, as city manager, you might be able to fight blight in both commercial district and residential district?
Again, and you'll find that I say this is not an out, but I will talk to the governing body about blight ordinances, but policies have to be approved before we can implement them. You'll look at opportunities for facade grants and other incentives to approve. A lot of those will come in your corridor plans. When I was in the city of Stockbridge, we had a urban redevelopment agency, and so we did what was called a livable corridors initiative, or an LCI plan, and that is a multi-year, I say year, but it's really decades, but they call it multi-year, but in some cases it'll take 20 years to redevelop and renovate an entire corridor. You have to stick to the plan. No single taxpayer that I know of will come in and say, hey, I'll pay out the wazoo and tax money, just get it done. It has to be done intergenerational, and there's a reason for that, is that everyone's paying in. So yes, there's lots of ways to address, and also you have to really get the governing bodies true, honest answer on how much code enforcement do you have? And I'll be the first to tell you, I like to very quickly come in and propose to change how we refer to code enforcement. I like to call it code compliance. The reason is it's not, and nor should it be our goal, to wallop you over the head and haul you into court and expend all of that taxpayer money. All we want is compliance, and a lot of times compliance is understanding. Most folks, when you go out, may not understand that, parking your car, on the grass is just leaking oil into our water table. Well, if that's illegal, you have to address it. Most places it's not illegal, but, I give that example as one to show you the sort of the hook and the bait, if you will.
What was your job in Stockbridge?
I came in as the finance director, also responsible for economic development. The title was treasurer. 4 months into that, the mayor filed a lawsuit, and the city administrator was out. At the time, it was a strong mayor form of government, so they made me interim city administrator, and then eventually changed the title, and then made it city manager, and then ultimately changed the form of government after I left.
You might be surprised to know that, Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, does the city have any sort of performance reviews for employees?
I believe we do, yes, sir.
And what would that be?
I'm gonna have to default it to the city manager.
It was my understanding, let's just disregard that. It was my understanding that we do not have annual performance reviews here, and we haven't had them in a long time. It's my understanding that employees get an across-the-board raise whenever the finances will allow, and it's been recently most every year. I don't know if this is a policy or if it's under your purview as city manager. Would you institute yearly performance reviews?
It's a given. It ought to be. I think you heard me echo multiple times as to why it needs to be in place. There's a lot of reason for it. So if you are working to an end game and someone's performance just isn't getting where they need to be, how could I look at you and say, well, do you understand what your job is? Well, no one's ever told me. No one's given me a job description. In my cities, you sign your job description. You know it. You have an opportunity to give feedback to your review before it's ever finalized. I read every one of those reviews. It's determined as to whether or not you are the best fit in that position. You may be best fit for somewhere else. How do I know if you ultimately want to be the city manager, for instance? And we should be investing in giving you those opportunities. So those reviews are paramount. And that's an administrative thing. Sure, the council could set policy and say you X, Y will. I'll say in Villa Rica, I know a council member actually had motion. They weren't, I think it was their holiday Christmas bonuses, which I had to come up with another name, by the way. Can't do public gifting. But that we could not issue those until they were convinced that every review had been done, and one of the council members wanted to come and see them, because they had the same thing. They had never been done before. So I'm just a big advocate of it.
Lastly, Mr. Milliron, of the 4 candidates being interviewed, what makes you the top candidate to become the next city manager of East Ridge?
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't know the other candidates. I can only speak for myself. So I have over 12 dedicated years of public administration experience. I love what I do. I enjoy it very much. I am a certified public manager, which is a national certification. I finished that up in November of last year. I am awaiting, hoping it's going to kick in very shortly, but I've been working towards it's called credentialed manager status, which, so all of my ethics are set by the International City County Managers Association. In fact, we at the conference we're just discussing what's called tenets 5 and 6. And so those are the ethics that I'm held accountable to on and beyond, and I can actually be sanctioned for violations of those. I have a solid background in technology, in education, in communication, the open records, open meetings law, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say I hold my certifications in economic development and also local government finance. And I provided the city with my historical training transcript, trainings, I tell folks you don't know what you don't know, and that's where you can get tripped up. Sometimes one of the questions that will come up from folks is, what was the worst failure and how do you address that? If you don't know something, you don't know something, and that's why I'm a big advocate on staff training. And that doesn't mean that everyone's going to a junket in Las Vegas. That training can be webinars, it can be your colleagues. You have a lot of talent in this area. You're a stone's throw from very, very large cities. You have MTAS. So that, and then if certainly while I was at the conference, this all occurred. So MTAS, which a gentleman that used to work for that was city manager in Oxford. So I actually learned a lot. We were comparing notes about how MTAS is very different. So as I related to the council member, I can talk to you about executive session in Georgia, but not necessarily here. But I can pick up the phone and call any other credentialed manager in the state. I can call the municipal league, I can call MTAS, and I can get what I need to do the job, to fill in the knowledge that I don't have, because I'm going to be learning too. And the one thing that you'll find is for about the first 100 days, I'll sit on my hands and learn, because it will be about learning, understanding the culture, understanding, getting to know the employees, and building trust and respect with them. This is a city that's had a lot of turnover in city managers. And so just as I said with the public safety leaving, your city manager, everything comes to a screech on a lot of things, that institutional knowledge. So we've given the opportunity here, I'm in it for the long haul, and I make that commitment to the governing body, and also under the ICMA ethics, that's also important of that tenure in the community. So there's a long, circumvented answer as to
I understand. One last question. How many employees in Hogansville?
In Hogansville, I have 48. In Villa Rica, I had 150. In Stockbridge, I had 74. But in Stockbridge, I also had 3 seasonal employee groups and 2 correctional boot camps. In Villa Rica, I had 2 boot camps. And in Hogansville, I have 1.
Thank you, Mr. Milline.
Thank you, sir.
Well, with that, sir, I'm going to open it up for any closing comments, remarks, questions you may have.
Well, certainly, it's always an honor when a governing body invites you in. As I say, during the past week, you all have vetted me. Didn't know I was being vetted. My police chief was the first to call me, and said, I just got a call from an investigator, like, for what? And then I was like, phew. So you never might hear that from a police chief. I was like, whoa, okay. So thank you, just as much as you certainly thanked me for the opportunity. It's really me that's saying thank you, because you're affording me the potential opportunity to come in and really represent what you want in the community and what the public has said that they want from you. They put you into office, and so you're vetting a candidate that's going to represent not just you, but the governing body. And I hope that as I've given my answers that you've heard me refer to the governing body multiple times. I respect that, I understand that you are a body duly assembled, that not one individual member represents the vision or the mission for the board or any action that the city manager should take. I don't get involved in the politics, although I have to be political. I have to be politically astute, and anyone that tells you in this role otherwise. Certainly thank you. I'm hoping that I get afforded the opportunity to move forward, and I hope that I was respectful of your time and didn't go over too much on my allotted answers. So with that, I say thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation, your interest in our city, and the MTAS that you had mentioned several times. Those are the ones that done the background checks for us.
I know it was a woman, and he referred to as an investigator, yes. And I was at the conference, I was like, what?
Yeah, you're a great organization to help us with many aspects, and we're utilizing them in many ways. I don't have anything else. If there's anybody in council. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you. And as promised, I would leave this with your city recorder, as long as she does not tase me.
Thank you. We'll take a brief break. So before we bring